Reaction time here on 76ers Now. ESPN divided each of the Eastern Conference teams into one of six different tiers, separating the contenders from the pretenders. So, where do they have the 76ers and where do they have some of the other top teams in the Eastern Conference? That's what we're going to dive into here on today's show. But first, do you think a bounce back year is in store for the 76ers team? Look, obviously a disaster of a season last year, but still a lot of talent on the roster. So, if you want the Sixers to make it back to the playoffs and play some meaningful basketball once again, hit that thumbs up icon and like today's video. Here are the six tiers that ESPN split up every team into six different tiers. Tier one being finals or bust. Tier two, teams that are right on the cusp of contending. Tier three, teams that kind of long shots to contend, but certainly have some potential. Tier four, just one team in this tier, kind of in the middle of everybody else. Then tier five, your playing teams, and then of course tier six, bottom of the barrel, those lottery bound teams already looking ahead to the 2026 NBA draft. So two teams were in tier one for ESPN, did not include the 76ers. The finals or bust teams, they said at least making the finals, not necessarily winning the finals. The Cleveland Cavaliers, the New York Knicks, makes a lot of sense to me. These are clearly the two best teams in the Eastern Conference, but I will say I'm not terrified of either of these teams. Now, we'll start with the Cavs. I do like what they did in the offseason. Instead of panicking and trying to trade away one of their top players because they flamed out once again in the playoffs with a lot of injuries, what do? They kept their guys and they made some nice additions. They trade for Lonzo Ball, bring him in there to Cleveland to be that backup point guard. You got still DeAndre Hunter in there as a backup. You bring Larry Nance back. So, look, the team is still obviously very talented and still looking really good. I will say this, though. As I mentioned, the Cavs seem to flame out in the playoffs year after year after year. They just disappoint for whatever reason, right? Whether it's injuries or not an excuse. They just can't get it done when it matters most. So, as talented as that Cavs team is, with all those All-Stars, all those good players, and the depth they do have now, they got to prove it to me, man. So, until I see them make a deep run in the playoffs, it's kind of the same thing as the Sixers, right? Until they prove it to you in the playoffs, how can you be scared of them and how can you predict them to make a deep run? Now, for the Knicks, of course, we saw them make that deep run to the conference finals this season and pretty much running back the same roster, some decent depth additions, bringing in Jordan Clarkson. Of course, they bring in Gershon Yabusele, absolutely steal him from the Philadelphia 76ers. And, their unit, their lineup was very good this season. Imagine they might be going the route they did at the end of last year, starting Mitchell Robinson, bring Josh Hart off the bench, whatever iteration they go with, obviously led by Jalen Brunson. It's a very good team. So look, the Knicks going to be a dangerous opponent, right? I've said right for the past couple weeks, it's the Cavs, it's the Knicks at the top of the East. The Knicks have a lot of talent. We'll see how they fare with Mike Brown as their new head coach with Tom Thibodeau out of New York. But I don't view the Knicks as some unbeatable team, some powerhouse like I would maybe the Oklahoma City Thunder out in the West, where you're like, man, how are we beating these guys, right? I could see a world where the Knicks are beatable. We just saw the Knicks be beaten by the Indiana Pacers, right? So neither of these top two teams in the East are teams that I'm looking at like, whew, those are going to be powerhouses, gauntlets to get by. So the East, man, we've talked about this for a few weeks now, really does seem to be more wide open than almost ever before. Then we get to tier two. This is where we see the Sixers come in, according to ESPN, one of three teams that are on the cusp of being a contender with the Orlando Magic and the Atlanta Hawks. They did have the Sixers at the bottom of this tier here. So how do they stack up with these other two teams that ESPN views in their same region? Well, the Magic also made a pretty big time move this offseason, bringing in Desmond Bane in a monster trade to fill that huge need they had to fill that three-point shooting void that was on their roster. So look, that starting five is great. Suggs, Bane, Wagner, Paolo, Wendell Carter. I like their bench a lot. A lot of great players. Anthony Black, Tyus Jones. I love the drafting of Jace Richardson. Some young players in there as well. You got Jonathan Isaac, Goga Batadze. They bring back Mo Wagner as well, someone I wanted the Sixers to try to get this offseason. So another very talented team who's trying to take advantage of a weaker Eastern Conference by making an all-in type of trade. But as talented as they are, also have their flaws, of course. They're still young and they're unproven, right? They're stars in Paolo and Franz, young players who have some playoff experience, but not a ton. And bringing in Desmond Bain going to shake things up. Wait to see how this iteration of this team does work out. So again, not a team that I'm looking at saying, yeah, they're definitely better than the Sixers. They're very, very talented for sure, but also unproven. Going to be a dangerous team though to watch out for if everything does click. And the Atlanta Hawks, kind of in a similar vein, although not quite as good last year in the past couple seasons as Orlando has been, but love the moves they made as well. Bringing in a Nickeil Alexander-Walker to come off the bench, be that combo guard, been really good for Minnesota. And of course, they acquire Kristaps Porzingis now. So with Jalen Johnson coming back healthy, that starting five is an absolute unit. I love the drafting of Asa Newell as well. They bring in Luke Kennard, and they still have former number one overall pick Zachary Risachet probably coming off the bench as well. Now the Hawks, health going to be a big question for them, similar to the Sixers. Now not quite as bad for Atlanta as it is for Philly, but Jalen Johnson coming off a season-ending injury. We know Kristaps Porzingis has had his troubles staying healthy, so they're going to have to stay healthy and, of course, prove that they can put all the pieces together. We know the trouble Atlanta has given Philadelphia in the past in the playoffs. Not going to revisit that too much, but another team you should be worried about, but another team that you're not absolutely terrified of, right? And that brings us to the 76ers, also in this tier of teams that are right there on the cusp, according to ESPN. This was their little write-up on Philadelphia. Sixers, one of the most challenging teams to place for an obvious reason. They have the talent and the experience to make a run, but always the questions of whether Joel Embiid and company can stay healthy long enough to make a real run. And after last season's disaster, which began with title hopes after the acquisition of Paul George, resulting in 104 combined missed games between him and Embiid during a 24-win season, same health questions front and center once again. Another question. Philly certainly has the depth, mentioning possibly keeping Quentin Grimes here, which I assume they will. But how will it manage having such young talent in spots while playing for the ultimate goal? It's not often you have a number 3 pick such as VJ Edgecombe playing alongside a trio of stars. Of course, Jared McCain, one of the best rookies from last year as well, before tearing his left meniscus in December. Only 21, should also be a key contributor. So look, Philadelphia certainly has a lot of question marks, right? Very, very unpredictable, as ESPN mentioned, and for a very good reason. The health reasons, as they mentioned, the kind of 2 timeline approach that they're trying to balance right now with a lot of young talent. And then, of course, the older veterans in Joel Embiid and Paul George. But, with that being said, if everything goes right, which I know it's a big if, right? And Sixers fans don't want to hear all this positivity sometimes, but if everything goes right and these guys can stay healthy, I don't think you can deny that it's one of the better rosters in the Eastern Conference, especially once you officially get Quentin Grimes back in there. I would slot him at the starting 2 guard. All of a sudden, Maxey, Grimes, PG, Oubre, Embiid off the bench. McCain, Edgecombe, who's looked great in Summer League. Edwards is coming off a great rookie season. You draft Johni Broome. You sign Trent Watford, Adem Bona, Andre Drummond still on the roster. It's still a talented team. And what kind of Joel Embiid do we get? I don't think they need him to be the 35-point-per-game guy that was winning MVP back a few years ago. I think if he takes a little bit of a back seat, now you need everybody to stay healthy for that, save him for the playoffs, you could have a team that could really, really make some noise. And especially this season, I think you have to take advantage. Again, we've talked about it before on the show, but with the injury to Jason Tatum, with the injury to Damian Lillard, with the injury to Tyrese Halliburton, 3 teams right there in Boston, Milwaukee, and Indiana that were at the top of the East that you don't think will be really contending this year. You haven't seen them in ESPN's tier yet here today. So this has to be the season for Philadelphia, in all honesty, before Embiid starts to get too much older, before Paul George starts to get too much older. I think putting them in this tier is the right spot. They're not far and away one of the top teams because they have all these questions. But man, if things do click, they are going to be a team that nobody's going to want to play come playoff time, assuming everybody is healthy. Fill in the blank before we get to the rest of these tiers here from ESPN. The Sixers are the blank best team in the East. First, second, third, maybe 13th again, like they were just a season ago. Go ahead, let me know down in the comment section. Now, this is where we get to a couple of teams I mentioned before. And this is the tier ESPN listed as long shots. For one reason or another, they have slight hopes, but something's holding them back a little bit, whether that's being injury like the Celtics or the Bucks, or just some youth questions and some roster turnover questions here with the Detroit Pistons. So teams in that third tier, look, obviously, as I mentioned, Boston with the injury to Jason Tatum. Obviously, sending out Drew Holiday, Kristaps Porzingis, a little bit of a transition year for Boston, but still have Derek White and Jalen Brown on the roster. They still have a talented team, so you don't want to have to play Boston, but not the powerhouse, of course. They've been in the past few years. I honestly would argue maybe Detroit should be in tier two with what they did last year. Gave the Knicks run for their money in that first round. Cade Cunningham, does he get even better now? Losing someone like Malik Beasley, what's going on with him? That obviously hurts, but you get Jaden Ivey back. Thompson gets even better. I think they have a shot to be a top four seed in the East. And then Milwaukee, of course, with the Dame injury. Yeah, you still have Giannis. They bring in Miles Turner. It's a great addition. But with no Dame, what kind of direction are they going in? We'll see. Giannis, though, always gives you at least a chance to make some noise come playoff time. Then the Pacers, in their own tier here, according to ESPN, kind of caught right in the middle, right? Not quite up to the level of those other teams because Tyrese Halliburton going to be out for the year with the Achilles, and then Miles Turner surprisingly signing with Milwaukee. So they still have guys like Andrew Nemhard, Aaron Nesmith, Pascal Siakam. What can they get in a possible jump this year from Benedict Mathurin, the legend T.J. McConnell on the roster? They still have talented players, right? And they're definitely not as bad as the teams we'll get to here in just a second. But again, without some of their top guys from last season, are they just kind of an average, adequate team? I'm sure Rick Carlisle will have them playing good ball, but team that was just in the finals last year, if they were completely healthy and they brought everyone back, I say they could go right back there again. But look, just the reality of the NBA now, they're not going to be as much of a threat. Then we get to some of these more bottom tier teams that are probably going to be in the play-in. It seems like the Heat, Bulls, and Raptors are playing teams really for the past few seasons. Is kind of where they have been. Miami, I like what they've done, but at the same time, Tyler Hero, Bam Adebayo, and the rest of that core, they add Norman Powell as well. I just don't think a team that's really going to be contending this year. The Bulls always seem to be stuck in limbo. They're nothing to be concerned about. The Raptors kind of think they're fake contending, paying all this money for a team with some good players like Brandon Ingram and Pascal Siakam. Of course, they still have or Pascal Siakam. I meant Scotty Barnes, of course. Jakob Pertl, Emmanuel Quickly, R.J. Barrett. They're paying a ton of money for a lot of these guys. Hasn't resulted in a lot of wins. So a bunch of teams that I think will kind of stay where they've been the past couple of years. And then you get to your lottery-bound teams, Nets, Wizards, Hornets. I think if LaMelo's healthy, I actually like what Charlotte has done. Drafting Concanupo, Brandon Miller in there. Of course, LaMelo leading the charge, but Wizards, Nets, going to be teams that are competing for that number one overall pick in 2026. Teams you definitely don't have to worry about. All right, so that'll do it for today's show. Look, the Sixers have a chance, man, this season in the East. If you made it this far in today's show, hopefully that means you enjoyed. If you did, help us out. Hit that thumbs up icon. It really does help here on the show. Push this video out to more Sixers fans. So let's YouTube know that you like the video. Appreciate it, and we'll catch you next time right here on 76ers Now.